Need to check the names file and then write the story. The band names are Marcus, Diana, Tyler, Curtis, Fletcher, Nathan, Renata, Sandra, Gerald, Nick, Claire, Lily, Joel, Yvonne, Kevin, Petra, Owen, Brooke, Garrett, Holt, Raymond, Valerie, Cole, Patricia, Lynette, Warren, Conrad, Adrian, Derek, Dominic, Arthur Mead, Renee, Becca, Jade, Paul, Bower, Patricia, Lynette, Warren, Conrad, Adrian, Derek, Dominic, Arthur Mead, Becca, Jade, Elaine, Brendan, Cassie, Rowan, Mitchell, Leonard. Now writing the story with new names. Protagonist male 35 to 60, first person, referring to others by relationship. I almost didn't go to the reunion. My wife said I was being antisocial, said I needed to get out more, stop moping around the house on weekends like some kind of wounded bear. She said this while packing her own bag for what she called a girl's getaway. 4 days at a lake house 3 hours north with her work friends. I had no reason to think anything of it. She'd done these trips before. I'd stayed home before. We had a system, so I shrugged, told her to have fun, and eventually texted my old college friend, I'll call him the only guy who's ever known me better than I know myself, and said fine. I'd come to the reunion. I'm 52. I teach high school history. I've been married for 11 years. I have a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a mortgage I've almost paid off, and a wife I thought I knew everything about. I want to be clear about that last part, because it matters. I wasn't naive. I wasn't some oblivious husband who missed every red flag. I was a man who had chosen to believe in his marriage with full information and full intention. There's a difference. At least, that's what I told myself for a long time. The reunion was at a rented venue in Columbus, about 200 miles from home. 3 days. Old friends, bad catering, worse karaoke. My friend, the one who got me there, his name doesn't matter right now. But I'll call him my best friend because that's exactly what he is, had driven down from Pittsburgh to be there. He found me within 30 seconds of me walking through the door and handed me a beer like no time had passed at all. You look terrible, he said. Thanks, I said. You look exactly the same. That's because I peaked in 2003 and made peace with it. I laughed for the first time in maybe a week. I hadn't realized how much I needed that. We stayed up late the first night, the kind of late where you stop checking the time and just keep talking. He asked about my wife. I said things were good. He nodded slowly in the way that means he didn't entirely believe me but wasn't going to push. That was the version of the story I was still telling myself back then. She called on the second night. Brief, cheerful. She'd had wine. She sounded like someone at a party, which made sense because she was at one. I asked how the lake house was, and she said beautiful. Really just beautiful, the water was perfect. I said I was glad. She said she missed me. I said I missed her too. I believed it. Both of us saying it and both of us meaning it. That's the cruelest kind of lie. The one where neither person knows they're telling it. The third day of the reunion, I ran into someone I hadn't expected to see. She was a woman I'd known casually from our neighborhood. She and her husband had lived 3 streets over for about 4 years before they divorced. I'd seen her at block parties, waved at her from the driveway. She had a sister who'd gone to the same college as me, which is how she'd ended up on the guest list. Small world. The kind of small world that feels enormous when it decides to shrink. We ended up sitting together at lunch by accident. The only 2 seats left at a table near the back. She was pleasant. We talked about the neighborhood, about how the Hendersons had finally redone their front porch, about the school levy that had just barely passed. Normal, forgettable conversation. And then she said, carefully, the way people say things when they're not sure if they should be saying them at all, I saw your wife last month. She seemed happy. I smiled. Good. She was with a group. At that new restaurant on Birch. The Italian place. Right, I said. She goes there with her work friends sometimes. The woman across from me went quiet for just a second too long. Oh, she said. Right. That's all. Just that. Oh, right. I didn't press. I didn't want to press. But I drove home from Columbus the next morning with that oh right sitting in the passenger seat beside me like an uninvited guest. My wife came home Sunday evening, sunburned and happy, smelling like sunscreen and white wine. She hugged me hard and said she'd missed me. I said I'd missed her too. She told me about the lake, about a kayaking trip that had gone slightly wrong, about her friend's horrible new boyfriend who couldn't stop talking about his podcast. I listened. I smiled. I made dinner. I was watching her the whole time the way you watch something you're not sure you recognize anymore, looking for a seam, a gap, something that didn't line up. I didn't find anything obvious. But I wasn't looking for something obvious. I was looking for something subtle. And I think that's worse, because once you start looking for subtle things, you start finding them everywhere. The restaurant on Birch. The Italian place. My wife had told me she'd spent that Friday at a work conference. She'd texted me from the conference. I remembered it clearly because she'd sent a photo of the buffet and a joke about rubber chicken. The conference was 2 hours south of the Italian place. I know. People can drive 2 hours. There are explanations. I'm a history teacher. I know better than anyone that the absence of an obvious lie doesn't mean the presence of truth. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself the woman at the reunion had misremembered the date. I told myself a lot of things over the next 2 weeks. Then I found the email. I wasn't snooping. I want to be honest about that because it matters to me, even now, even after everything. We shared a laptop for household stuff, bills, subscriptions, her online grocery orders that I was always being recruited to pick up. She'd left her personal email open. I was looking for a confirmation number for our internet provider. I wasn't looking for what I found. His name was in the subject line, a name I didn't recognize. I wouldn't have noticed except that the subject line read, "Miss you already," and the timestamp was from a Sunday. The Sunday she'd come home from the lake house. I sat very still for approximately 4 seconds, then I read it. I'm not going to reproduce the whole thing here because some things don't need to be shared in full, but the important parts. They'd met at a conference 18 months ago. It had started slowly. It had not stayed slow. He lived in a city 4 hours away. The lake house trip, which her friends had genuinely organized, I later confirmed, she hadn't lied about that part, had included a 1-day detour. 1 day, 4 hours, and back. Her friends had covered for her. Not all of them. Some of them. Miss you already. 18 months. I closed the laptop. I took Biscuit for a walk. It was raining lightly and I didn't bring an umbrella, and I just walked until my shoulders were soaked and my shoes were wet and Biscuit was giving me looks like this is not what I agreed to. I walked for maybe 45 minutes. The whole time I felt nothing. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Just this strange, almost academic clarity, like I was watching myself from a small distance and taking notes. Fact. My wife had been having an affair for 18 months. Fact. She had planned a detour specifically to see him during a trip I had believed was a girls' weekend. Fact. Her friends had known. At least some of them. Fact. She had come home and hugged me and said she missed me. I came back inside. Biscuit shook water all over the entryway. I toweled him off. I made tea. My wife came downstairs in her robe, saw me at the kitchen table looking the way I apparently looked, and said, "You okay? You're soaked." "Went for a walk," I said. "In the rain?" Biscuit needed it. She accepted this. That was another thing I noted. From my small academic distance, she accepted it without curiosity. She poured herself a glass of water and went back upstairs. I sat at the table for another hour and made a list in my head. Not a list of grievances. A list of decisions. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't say anything the next day either. Or the day after that. I know this sounds cold. Some people, when I've told this story since, have reacted with surprise. Why didn't you confront her right away? Because I needed to know what I wanted first. Confrontation is easy. Knowing what you actually want from the other side of it is hard. I've watched enough bad history to know that people who rush into battles without knowing their objective usually lose them even when they win. I called my best friend, the one from Pittsburgh. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you need?" Not, "Oh my God," or "What a," or any of the theatrical responses. Just, "What do you need?" That's why he's my best friend. That's why he's been my best friend. That's why he's been my best friend for 30 years. "I need a few weeks," I said, "and I need you to not say anything to anyone." "Done," he said. "Call me whenever. Middle of the night, whatever." I used those weeks carefully. I talked to a lawyer just to understand my options, not to make any decisions. I gathered what I needed to gather, not in a vengeful way, just in a practical one. 11 years of marriage involves a lot of shared logistics, and I wanted to understand the full picture before I did anything else. I also, quietly, started going to a therapist, not because I was falling apart. I was surprisingly functional, which my therapist later told me is actually a stress response and not a sign of emotional health. But that's a different story. But because I didn't want to make a decision I'd regret. Here's what I decided after 3 weeks of very quiet deliberation. I didn't want to save the marriage. I want to sit with that for a second because it surprised even me. I had expected to feel torn. I had expected some part of me to fight for it, to want to try counseling or a conversation or the kind of dramatic airport runway moment where someone says the right thing and you remember why you chose each other. That part of me didn't show up. What showed up instead was something much simpler and much sadder. I looked at 11 years and I saw the math, and the math didn't work anymore. It wasn't just the affair. It was what the affair revealed. That she had been capable of this level of sustained deception. That she had let me love her through 18 months of it without flinching. That when she said, "I missed you coming home from the lake house," she had been completely fluent in that sentence in a way I'd never suspected. I didn't want to be in a marriage where I'd be listening to everything through a translator for the rest of my life. On a Thursday evening in November, I made dinner. She came home from work and said it smelled good and sat down at the table and poured herself a glass of wine. I sat down across from her. I said, "I need to tell you something." She looked up. I said, "I found the emails from him. I know about the last 18 months. I know about the lake house." The color left her face in stages, which is something I didn't know happened outside of movies, but apparently does. First her cheeks, then her lips, then something around her eyes. She didn't deny it. I'll give her that. She didn't insult me by trying. What she said after a long silence was, "I'm so sorry." I nodded. "I know. I don't know how. It just, you don't have to explain the mechanism," I said, not unkindly. "I understand that these things happen in steps and not all at once." She was crying now, quietly, the kind of crying that happens when someone is ashamed rather than devastated. "I want to fix this," she said. "I want to try." I looked at her for a moment. At a face I'd looked at across 1,000 dinners, at someone I had genuinely loved, and who had genuinely, I think, loved me, in whatever imperfect and finally insufficient way she'd been capable of. "I know you do," I said. "I believe that's real. But I've had 3 weeks to think about this, and I don't want to." She blinked. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said. "I'd like us to handle this as decently as possible. I think we owe each other that." She said something about counseling, about how we'd been together 11 years and didn't that mean something, about how she'd end it completely, immediately. She already had. It was over. I listened. I let her say all of it. Then I said, "I believe you would try. I don't doubt your intentions, but what I know now, about what you're capable of, about how long you can maintain 2 different versions of a life at the same time, I can't unknow that, and I can't build something on top of it." She left the table and went upstairs, and I sat in the kitchen for a while longer. Biscuit came and put his head in my lap. I scratched his ears. We were separated by January. She moved into an apartment across town. The house, my house, our house, the almost paid-off mortgage, stayed with me. She hadn't wanted to fight about it, and, honestly, I think she was relieved by the simplicity. By the end of February, the lawyers were mostly done talking to each other. My best friend drove down from Pittsburgh for a weekend in March. We went to a diner, ate too much, complained about our knees, talked about everything except the divorce for about 3 hours, and then talked about it all at once. He said he was proud of me for not blowing it up dramatically. I said dramatically would have been more satisfying. He said probably, but then I'd have had to live inside the drama, and drama is exhausting. He's right. He's almost always right. I've never told him that often enough. Here's the part people don't tell you about ending an 11-year marriage with dignity. It's quiet. It's very, very quiet. There's no climax. There's no scene where someone throws something or says the perfect crushing thing. There's just a series of practical conversations and a stack of documents, and a day when you sign your name several times and then drive home to a house that echoes differently than it used to. I cried once, just once. About 3 weeks after she moved out, I was making coffee on a Saturday morning, and I reached into the cabinet for a mug and I grabbed her mug by accident, the big blue one she'd had since before I knew her. And I stood there holding it for maybe 60 seconds, and then I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried for about 15 minutes. Biscuit sat next to me the whole time with his chin on my knee. Then I got up and made the coffee and drank it out of a different mug. I'm not going to tell you I've fully healed, because that's not how it works, and I don't trust anyone who tells you it is. What I can tell you is that I'm different now. I know things about myself I didn't know before. I know that I can sit with something enormous and not panic. I know that I can make decisions from a quiet place instead of a reactive one. I know that I have at least one person in my life who will drive 200 miles and order the same bad diner coffee and not need me to perform being okay. There was a footnote. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I heard through a mutual friend, not one of the ones who'd covered for her at the lake house, those friendships are over, and I have no interest in relitigating them, that the man she'd left me for, or rather the man she'd maintained alongside me, had ended things. I don't know the details. I didn't ask for them. But I heard that she had called a mutual acquaintance, someone on the edges of our old social circle, and she'd been, in the words of the mutual friend, not doing well. I sat with this information. I examined it for any satisfaction I might feel. I found a very small amount. Less than I expected. What I mostly felt was tired, not triumphant, not vindicated, just tired, the way you feel at the end of a long trip when you finally get home and you set your bags down and you don't have to go anywhere else tonight. If she reads this, and I don't know if she will, and part of me doesn't care either way, I don't want her to be miserable. I want her to figure out whatever it is inside her that made this feel like a viable choice for 18 months. I want her to do the work I'm doing. I want her to be okay, eventually, in the way that takes a long time to arrive and doesn't look like what you imagined. But I don't want to hear about it, and I don't want to be part of it. I got a new mug, red, with a chip in the handle that I keep meaning to throw away and keep not throwing away. I make coffee in it every Saturday morning. Biscuit sits at my feet. The house doesn't echo as much as it used to. Or maybe I've just gotten used to the new acoustics. I'm teaching a unit on the fall of the Roman Republic this semester. The students always want to know if it could have been saved. I tell them that's the wrong question. The right question is, save for what and at what cost and for how long? Some structures aren't weakened by one catastrophic event. They're weakened by 1,000 small ones. The kind that don't look like anything until they all show up at once. I'm not comparing my marriage to the Roman Republic. That would be a little dramatic, even for a history teacher. But I do think about cost a lot more than I used to. And I do think about what's worth building and what's worth walking away from, and how the same person can be the answer to both questions at different moments in time. Biscuit just looked at me from across the room with an expression that says, dinner is approximately 8 minutes late. He's not wrong. He's never wrong about things like this. I'm gonna go feed my dog and call my best friend and eat something out of the fridge that probably needs using up before tomorrow. And that's okay. That's enough. That's actually more than enough. I've thought a lot about what I could have done differently. Not in the way people mean when they're trying to assign blame. I mean genuinely, quietly, without agenda. And what I keep coming back to is this. I couldn't have done much differently, because I was operating with the information I had. That's all any of us ever do. The hardest thing about being deceived by someone you trust isn't the deception itself. It's the retrospective audit. You go back through every memory and you hold it up to the light and you look for where it changed color. Some of them do. Most of them don't, and that's almost worse. Because it means you weren't foolish. You weren't missing something obvious. You were simply trusting a person who had decided on their own that your trust was a resource to draw from rather than a responsibility to honor. That's a choice she made, not a mistake. Not a moment of weakness that spiraled. A sustained, deliberate choice made thousands of times over 18 months. Every morning she woke up and said nothing. Every evening she came home and said, "I missed you." Every weekend she covered her tracks and called me from a parking lot and made her voice sound like everything was fine. That's not a slip. That's architecture. And here's what I've learned about people who build that kind of architecture. They're not monsters. That would be easier. They're just people who decided, somewhere along the line, that their own comfort was worth more than your reality. That's not a flaw you can fix with enough counseling or enough second chances. It's a value system. And you can't love someone into different values. I tried for 11 years in a marriage where I didn't even know I was trying. What I know now, what I wish I'd understood earlier, not to have left sooner, but just to have been kinder to myself in the waiting, is that integrity isn't what you perform when people are watching. It's what you maintain when no one ever will know. My wife failed that test for a year and a half. I didn't know it was a test. That's the part that took me longest to stop being angry about. The intelligence piece is this: I made better decisions because I slowed down, because I sat with the information before I reacted to it, because I asked myself what I actually wanted before I asked her anything at all. Rushing into confrontation would have felt satisfying for about 45 seconds, and then I'd have been making the rest of my decisions from inside a storm. The quiet was hard. The quiet was also the thing that protected me. And the last thing, the part about not giving up, about continuing forward even when forward looks like an empty house and a dog and a chipped red mug, is that survival doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like making coffee on a Saturday morning and calling your best friend and eating leftovers and going to work on Monday and teaching teenagers about the Roman Republic and finding, slowly, that the echo in the house has gotten smaller. That's not a dramatic comeback. It's just a life, reassembling itself one ordinary day at a time. That's enough. It really is.